They whispered ugly things about the obese girl. The mountain man heard it all and did this. The late autumn sun hung low over the settlement of Cedar Hollow, casting long shadows across the muddy main street. It was 1794, and the small frontier outpost in what would one day become Kentucky existed as a precarious toehold of civilization against the vast wilderness. The settlement consisted of perhaps 20 rough-hewn cabins, a trading post, a blacksmith's forge, and a crude tavern that served as the social center of the community. Martha Pemberton stood behind the counter of her father's trading post, her large frame hunched slightly as she organized bolts of cloth that had arrived on the last supply wagon from Virginia. At 23 years old, she had long since accepted her lot in life. Her body had always been heavy, even as a child, and the years of frontier living with its limited diet of salt pork, cornmeal, and whatever vegetables grew in their small garden had not diminished her size. "Would you look at the size of her?" came a woman's voice from near the doorway, pitched just loud enough to carry across the room. "How does she even move around that counter?" Martha's hand stilled on the fabric, but she didn't look up. She had heard it all before, the whispers, the poorly concealed comments, the pitying looks mixed with disgust. "My Henry says she eats enough for 3 men," another voice joined in. "Says her father must spend half his profits just keeping her fed." "It's a wonder any man would take her, even with her father's business," the first woman continued, "though I suppose if she came with the trading post—" Martha felt the familiar burn of tears behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She had learned years ago that crying only made it worse, gave them more ammunition. Instead, she focused on her work, her thick fingers moving with surprising grace as she folded and stacked the cloth. The women continued their conversation, apparently unconcerned that she could hear every word. They discussed her as if she were livestock, debating whether even a desperate trapper would consider taking her as a wife, speculating on how much her father would have to pay in dowry to make her attractive to any man. What Martha didn't notice, what none of them noticed, was the massive figure that had entered the trading post and now stood in the shadows near the back wall. He was a mountain of a man, standing well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders as broad as an axe handle. His buckskin clothing was worn but well maintained, and a long rifle rested easily in the crook of his arm. His face, weathered and tanned from years in the wilderness, was partially obscured by a thick, dark beard, but his eyes, pale blue and surprisingly gentle, took in everything. Ezekiel "Zeke" Bridger had come down from his cabin in the high mountains to trade his winter's worth of furs. He made the journey twice a year, in spring and fall, spending the bare minimum of time in settlements before returning to his solitary life in the wilderness. He had lived alone for the past 7 years, ever since a Shawnee raiding party had killed his wife and infant daughter, leaving him the sole survivor of a small family group attempting to establish a homestead in the frontier. He had been listening to the women's conversation for several minutes, and something dark and cold had settled in his chest. He knew cruelty had seen it in many forms on the frontier, but there was something particularly vicious about this casual destruction of another person's dignity. The women finally made their purchases, needles and thread, some tobacco for their husbands, and departed, their laughter drifting back through the open door. Martha remained at her position behind the counter, her head still bowed, her shoulders rigid with suppressed emotion. Zeke waited a moment, then stepped forward, his moccasins making barely a whisper on the wooden floor. When he reached the counter, he cleared his throat gently. Martha looked up, and for a moment Zeke saw the raw pain in her eyes, before she quickly masked it with a professional smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I help you?" "I've got furs to trade," Zeke said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in his chest. "Been trapping all winter. Got beaver, fox, and a couple of prime bear pelts." Martha nodded, her demeanor shifting to business. "My father usually handles the fur trades, but he's gone to Lexington for supplies. Won't be back for another week. But I can make you an offer if you're willing to deal with me." "I'm willing," Zeke said simply. For the next hour, they negotiated. Martha proved to be sharp and knowledgeable, examining each pelt with a practiced eye, noting the quality of the fur, the preparation of the hide, the size and condition. She was fair, but not foolish, and Zeke found himself respecting her business acumen. When they finally agreed on a price, he was satisfied he had gotten a good deal, and more importantly, he knew she had as well. As Martha counted out his payment in a combination of hard currency and credit against future purchases, Zeke spoke again. "Those women earlier, the ones who were talking." Martha's hand stilled, and a flush crept up her neck. I didn't think anyone else was here. I was in the back, came in while they were talking." He paused, choosing his words carefully. They were wrong. Every word they said was wrong. Martha gave a bitter little laugh. "You don't have to be kind, Mr. Bridger, Ezekiel Bridger, but folks call me Zeke, and I'm not being kind. I'm being truthful." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It wasn't pity, she had seen enough of that to recognize it instantly. It was something else, understanding perhaps, or recognition. "They say those things because they're small," Zeke continued. "Small-minded, small-hearted. They don't see you. They just see something they can use to make themselves feel bigger." "You sound like you speak from experience," Martha said quietly. Zeke was silent for a long moment. "I do. Different reasons, maybe, but I know what it's like to be judged for things that don't matter, to have people whisper and assume they know your worth." Martha felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the armor she had built around herself. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saying that, even if you don't mean it." "I mean it," Zeke said firmly. Then, surprising himself as much as her, he added, "I'll be staying in town for a few days, getting supplies ready for winter. If you'd allow it, I'd like to call on you. Properly, I mean." Martha's eyes widened. "Call on me? Why would you—" She trailed off, old habits of self-deprecation rising automatically. "Because I'd like to know you better," Zeke said simply. "Because in 1 hour of talking business, you've shown more intelligence and fairness than most folks show in a lifetime, and because—" He paused, then forged ahead. "Because those women were wrong, and I'd like the chance to prove it to you." Martha stood frozen, her mind racing. This had to be a joke, or a mistake, or some kind of cruel game. Men like him, strong, capable, clearly competent in the harsh frontier world, they didn't pursue women like her. They couldn't. It violated some unspoken law of nature and society. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw no mockery, no hidden agenda, just an honest question, waiting for an honest answer. Yes, she heard herself say. "Yes, you may call on me." A slow smile spread across Zeke's face, transforming his rugged features. "Tomorrow evening, then, after you close the store?" "Tomorrow evening," Martha agreed, her heart pounding. After Zeke left, Martha stood alone in the trading post, her mind whirling. Part of her was terrified that she had just set herself up for humiliation. But another part, a part she had thought long dead, felt a small flutter of hope. The next day seemed to drag endlessly. Martha went through her usual routines, opening the store, helping customers, managing inventory, but her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. She had told herself 100 times not to get her hopes up, that this was probably just kindness or pity on Zeke's part, that he would likely not even show up. But as the sun began to set and she was closing up the store, she saw his tall figure approaching down the main street. He had cleaned up, his beard was neatly trimmed, and he wore what was clearly his best buckskin shirt, decorated with simple but elegant beadwork. "Miss Pemberton!" He greeted her with a small bow that would have been perfectly appropriate in a Virginia drawing room. "Mr. Bridger," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please, call me Martha." "Then you must call me Zeke." He gestured toward the edge of town. "Would you walk with me? There's a spot by the creek that's right peaceful this time of evening." They walked together through the settlement, and Martha was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. But Zeke seemed oblivious to it all, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking her about the trading post, about her life in Cedar Hollow, about her thoughts on the continuing troubles with the British and the Indian tribes. Martha found herself relaxing, drawn into genuine conversation. Zeke listened, really listened to what she said, asking thoughtful questions, offering his own perspectives drawn from years in the wilderness. He treated her opinions with respect, even when he disagreed, and never once did she feel patronized or dismissed. They reached the creek as the last light was fading from the sky. The water burbled over smooth stones, and fireflies were beginning to emerge from the grass along the bank. It was, Martha had to admit, quite peaceful. "Can I ask you something?" Martha said suddenly, the question that had been burning in her mind all day finally breaking free. "Why me? You could have your pick of women in this settlement or any other. Why would you want to spend time with someone like me?" Zeke was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening water. "7 years ago," he said finally, "I lost everything that mattered to me. My wife, Sarah, and our baby girl, Rebecca. Shawnee raiders hit our homestead while I was out hunting. By the time I got back—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. Martha reached out instinctively, placing her hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry." Zeke nodded. "For a long time after that, I didn't want to be around people. Couldn't stand it. Went up into the high mountains and stayed there, only coming down when I absolutely had to. And you know what I learned up there, in all that solitude?" "What?" Martha asked softly. "That the things people think matter, the things they judge each other for, they're mostly nonsense. Beauty, wealth, status. None of it means a damn thing when you're facing a hard winter or a wounded bear, or just the simple question of whether you're going to survive another day." He turned to look at her, his pale eyes intense in the gathering darkness. "What matters is strength. Not the kind you measure with muscles, but the kind that lives in here." He tapped his chest. "And yesterday, listening to those women tear you down while you just kept working, kept your dignity, kept your kindness. That's strength, Martha. Real strength. Martha felt tears spilling down her cheeks, and this time she didn't try to stop them. I don't feel strong, she whispered. Most days I just feel tired. Tired of the stares, the whispers, the casual cruelty. Tired of being alone. I know that, tired, Zeke said. But you're still here, still standing, still kind, even when the world hasn't been kind to you. That's not weakness, Martha. That's courage. They stood together by the creek as full darkness fell, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Martha didn't feel alone. Over the next few days, Zeke continued to call on Martha. They would walk together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his life in the mountains, about the wildlife and the changing seasons and the harsh beauty of true wilderness. She told him about running the trading post, about the books she loved to read, a secret passion she rarely shared with anyone, about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday, even though she knew it was unlikely. The gossip in Cedar Hollow reached a fever pitch. People couldn't understand why the formidable mountain man was courting the oversized daughter of the trading post owner. Speculation ran rampant. He must be after her father's business, or he had taken leave of his senses, or it was all some elaborate joke. The same women who had gossiped about Martha that first day cornered her in the street one afternoon. "You should be careful," one of them said, her voice dripping with false concern. "A man like that, he's probably just toying with you, having a bit of fun before he goes back to his mountain." Martha felt the old familiar hurt trying to claw its way back into her heart. But then she remembered Zeke's words. These women were small. Their opinions didn't define her worth. "Thank you for your concern," Martha said evenly, "but I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs." She walked away with her head high, leaving them sputtering behind her. That evening, when she told Zeke about the encounter, she was surprised to see anger flash across his face. "They won't stop, will they?" he said, his voice tight. "They can't just let people be happy." "It's all right," Martha said, though her heart was warmed by his anger on her behalf. "I'm used to it." "Well, you shouldn't have to be." Zeke took a deep breath, then reached out and took both of her hands in his. "Martha, I know it's only been a week, and maybe I'm moving too fast, but life on the frontier doesn't allow for long courtships. Winter's coming, and I need to get back to my cabin soon. But before I go, I need to know, is there any chance you might feel for me what I've come to feel for you?" Martha's breath caught. "And what is it you feel?" "Like I've been walking through fog for 7 years, and you're the sun burning it away," Zeke said, his voice rough with emotion. "Like maybe there's a reason I survived when my family didn't. Like maybe I was meant to find you here, now." "I feel it too," Martha whispered. "I'm scared, Zeke. Scared that this isn't real, scared that I'll wake up and it will all have been a dream. But I feel it." "Then come with me," Zeke said urgently. "Come back to my cabin. It's remote 2 days' journey into the high country, but it's solid and warm. I've got enough supplies laid by for winter, and the hunting is good. We could marry before we leave, make it proper and legal. I know it's asking a lot, asking you to leave your father and everything you know, but—" "Yes," Martha interrupted him. "Yes, I'll come with you." Zeke's face split into a wide grin, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her close. Martha, who had been hugged so rarely in her adult life, felt something break open inside her, all the loneliness, all the pain, all the years of believing she was unworthy of love, and in its place, flooding in like spring melt, was joy. They were married 3 days later by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through Cedar Hollow. Martha's father, who had returned from Lexington just in time, gave his blessing with tears in his eyes. He had long worried about what would become of his daughter, had seen the way the world treated her, and had felt helpless to change it. But Zeke Bridger was clearly a good man, and more importantly, he looked at Martha like she hung the moon. The wedding was small, just Martha's father, the preacher, and a few of the more decent townsfolk. The gossip stayed away, which suited Martha just fine. She wore her best dress, let out to accommodate her size, and Zeke wore his beaded buckskin and looked more handsome than any man had a right to be. As they spoke their vows, Martha noticed several of the women who had been cruel to her standing at a distance, watching with expressions that ranged from confusion to something that might have been envy. She felt a moment of vindictive satisfaction, then let it go. They didn't matter. Only this mattered, Zeke's strong hand holding hers, his voice steady as he promised to love and cherish her. The simple gold ring he slipped onto her finger. They left the next morning, Martha riding a sturdy pack horse laden with supplies and personal belongings, Zeke walking alongside on foot with his long rifle ready. The journey into the mountains was long and arduous, but Zeke was patient, stopping frequently to let Martha rest, pointing out landmarks and wildlife along the way. On the second evening, as they made camp in a small clearing, Martha voiced one of the fears that had been nagging at her. "Zeke, I need you to know, I'm not strong like frontier women are supposed to be. I can't chop wood all day or carry water up from the creek without getting winded. I can shoot a rifle, and I know my way around a kitchen, but I'm not sure I can be the kind of wife you need out here." Zeke set down the firewood he'd been gathering and came to sit beside her. "Martha, you want to know what I need? I need someone who can keep the books on my fur trade, because numbers make my head hurt. I need someone who knows about medicine and herbs, because I'm useless with anything more complicated than a poultice. I need someone who can read to me in the evenings, because I miss stories, but my letters aren't good enough to get through more than a page or two. And mostly, I need someone who'll remind me that there's more to life than just surviving." He cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "You already are the wife I need, just as you are." Martha kissed him then, properly for the first time, and discovered that it was every bit as wonderful as she had secretly dreamed it might be. They reached Zeke's cabin the next afternoon. It was built into a hillside, with a solid stone chimney and thick log walls. Inside, it was surprisingly cozy, one large room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping loft, and windows that looked out over a pristine valley. Zeke had clearly made efforts to prepare for her arrival. There were wildflowers in a rough clay pot on the table, extra blankets on the bed, and shelves he had built specifically for storing kitchen supplies. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Martha had to learn the rhythms of mountain life, how to preserve meat before the cold set in, how to read the weather signs, how to keep the fire going efficiently through the long nights. But Zeke was patient, teaching her what she needed to know and never making her feel inadequate when she struggled. And Martha brought her own skills to the partnership. She organized Zeke's chaotic stores of supplies, set up a proper inventory system for his furs, and created a comfortable home, out of what had been merely shelter. She introduced variations into their diet beyond the monotonous meat and Johnny cakes that Zeke had been surviving on. And in the evenings, true to his word, she read to him Cooper's Tales of the Frontier, Swift's satires, whatever book she had brought from her father's small collection. As autumn turned to winter and the snows came, they settled into a comfortable domestic life. Zeke still trapped his lines, bringing home furs to prepare and store for the spring trade, but he was home more than he had been in years. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, Martha sewing or mending while Zeke carved or repaired his equipment, talking about their days or simply enjoying comfortable silence. One evening in late December, as a blizzard howled outside and they were snug inside by the fire, Zeke looked up from the axe handle he was working on. "Are you happy, Martha?" he asked suddenly. "Truly happy? Not just making the best of things?" Martha set down her mending and looked at him seriously. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day about strength being what's in here?" She touched her chest. "For my whole life, I thought I had to apologize for existing, that I was somehow wrong, somehow less than, because of how I looked. Every day was about making myself as small and invisible as possible, even though that was impossible." She moved to sit beside him on the bench, taking his hand. "But here, with you, I don't feel that way. I feel like I can just be. I can be loud or quiet, happy or sad, energetic or tired, and it's all okay. You don't need me to be anything other than myself. So yes, Zeke, I am truly happy, happier than I ever imagined I could be." Zeke pulled her close, and she rested her head on his broad shoulder. "I never thought I'd feel whole again," he admitted quietly. "After Sarah and Rebecca, I was sure that part of my life was over, but you've given me something I didn't think I'd ever have again, a reason to look forward instead of back." They sat together in the firelight, the storm raging harmlessly outside their secure walls, and both of them knew they had found something rare and precious. Winter passed, then spring came, and with it, changes. Martha discovered she was with child in early March, and Zeke's joy was tempered with worry. He knew the dangers of childbirth, especially this far from any doctor or midwife. But Martha was calm. "Women have been having babies in frontier cabins since there's been a frontier," she reminded him. "I've got the medical books my father gave me, and you're handy enough to assist if needed. We'll be fine." Still, as summer approached and Martha grew larger, Zeke found himself constantly anxious. He made the journey down to Cedar Hollow to consult with the settlement's midwife, memorizing everything she told him about the birthing process and what could go wrong. He prepared the cabin obsessively, gathering clean linens, boiling water before it was needed, making sure they had all the herbs and medicines that might be required. Martha bore his nervous energy with patient amusement. "You do realize that I'm the one who has to actually have this baby, right?" she teased him one evening. "You're just the assistant." "An assistant who needs to know what he's doing," Zeke replied, consulting his notes for the 100th time. Their daughter was born on a warm evening in August, as the sun set over the mountains in a blaze of gold and crimson. The birth was long and difficult, but Martha was strong, and Zeke proved surprisingly competent as a birthing assistant once he got over his initial panic. When he finally placed the tiny, squalling infant in Martha's arms, they both wept. They named her Sarah Rebecca, honoring the family Zeke had lost while celebrating the new family they had created. Little Sarah, they called her Sally, was healthy and robust, with her mother's brown eyes and her father's strong lungs. As autumn came again, and they prepared for their second winter together, Zeke would often find himself just watching Martha and Sally, marveling at the strange turns life could take. If someone had told him 2 years ago that he would be happy again, would have a wife and daughter and a reason to smile, he would have thought them mad. But here he was, sitting by the fire on a cold October evening, watching Martha nurse their daughter while humming a gentle lullaby. The firelight cast a warm glow over them both, and Zeke thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. "What are you thinking?" Martha asked, catching him staring. "I'm thinking about those women in Cedar Hollow," Zeke said honestly. "The ones who whispered ugly things about you. And I'm thinking about how blind they were, how they looked at you and saw nothing but surface, never guessing at the strength and kindness and courage underneath." Martha smiled. "Their blindness gave me you, so I can't be too angry with them." "I suppose that's true." Zeke came to sit beside her, gently touching Sally's tiny fist. "But I want you to know something, Martha. I want you to know that even if we hadn't ended up together, even if nothing had come of that first meeting, you were still worth more than all their opinions combined. You were always enough, always valuable, always deserving of love and respect. I didn't make you worthy. You always were." Martha's eyes filled with tears, and she leaned over to kiss him gently. "I know that now," she whispered. "You've taught me that. Every day, in 100 small ways, you've taught me to see myself the way you see me." "And how do I see you?" Zeke asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Like I matter," Martha said simply. "Like I'm someone worth crossing mountains for, worth building a life with, worth loving just as I am." "You are all of those things," Zeke confirmed, "and more." They sat together as night fell over the mountains, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, and outside the wind carried the first hints of winter. But inside the fire burned warm and bright, and their little family was safe and whole and happy. The years rolled on. Sally grew into a bright, curious child who loved exploring the mountain with her father and learning to read with her mother. Martha taught her not just letters and numbers, but also the harder lessons that worth comes from within, that kindness is stronger than cruelty, and that love can be found in the most unexpected places. Sometimes, when supply runs brought them to Cedar Hollow, they would see the women who had once gossiped so cruelly about Martha. These women were older now, worn down by the hard frontier life, many of them bitter about how their own lives had turned out. They would look at Martha still heavy, but now confident and secure in her place in the world, walking hand in hand with her mountain man husband, their healthy daughter skipping beside them, and there was often something like regret in their eyes. But Martha never gloated, never threw her happiness in their faces. She simply nodded politely and moved on, because she had learned that the best revenge was a life well lived, and hers was very well lived indeed. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Zeke took Martha's hand. "You know what I heard in that trading post that day?" he asked. "I heard people trying to make themselves feel bigger by making you feel smaller. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that real strength doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from building others up. And you've done that for me, Martha. You've built me up, made me better, given me a reason to be better. You've done the same for me, Martha replied, squeezing his hand. We've built each other up. That's what love does. Zeke smiled and pulled her close, and as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they sat together in perfect contentment. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of their respective pains. And if sometimes the mountain winds carried whispers, echoes of ugly words spoken long ago in a trading post in Cedar Hollow, they no longer mattered. They were just noise, insignificant and powerless against the solid reality of a love that had proven itself stronger than judgment, deeper than appearances, and more enduring than the mountains themselves.